Service is beautiful. At its best, I think it reflects one of those deepest of truths about humanity. That is that we were made for each other. We find meaning when we give, when we lift burdens, when we put another's good before our own. I think service pulls us out of selfishness and into connection. It in essence reminds us that life isn't just about what we can get, but also what we can give. But service also does have a shadow side to it, doesn't it? I mean, what begins as generosity can quietly slip into disappearance. And we become so focused on the needs of others that we often neglect our own. And we confuse helping with erasing. And we hide behind sacrifice to avoid saying no, to avoid being honest, to avoid being seen. And when that happens, I think service stops being love and starts being self betrayal. Now, there's a subtle difference between giving and disappearing. See, giving is rooted in choice, whereas disappearing is rooted in fear. Giving flows from integrity, whereas disappearing undermines it. And while those two may look similar on the surface, their impact on intimacy couldn't be more different. See, intimacy requires presence. It requires us to bring our whole selves to the table, our strengths, our weaknesses, our boundaries, our truths. And when service turns into disappearing, I think presence is lost. And we show up as useful, but not really as real. And others receive our actions, but they never feel or really receive us. And that gap slowly starves that connection. I mean, I felt this myself, this tension within me. There were seasons when I thought that the more I gave, the more valuable I became. I said yes to everything. I carried more than I should have. And I told myself, this is love. But underneath all this, I was exhausted. I was resentful. I was hollow. I wasn't serving from fullness. I was serving from fear. Fear of being unwanted, fear of being unworthy unless I was useful. And that kind of service does not build intimacy, it just erodes it. And for young men especially, this message is urgent, I would say. Many of us, we've been taught that service equals sacrifice at all costs, that our worth comes from what we're providing and not who we are. But when service is divorced from identity, it becomes slavery. And we're not giving from wholeness anymore. We're actually giving ourselves away until there's nothing left. And a man who has disappeared, he cannot build intimacy because intimacy requires that we be present. Like integrity. Integrity calls us to be balanced. It calls us to give in ways that reflect our values without actually erasing our voice. It asks us to love others without abandoning ourselves. And because love without self-respect isn't love, it, it ends up being fear dressed up as a virtue. And there's a paradox here. And that's when we serve from integrity, our service actually becomes powerful. People receive not just our actions, but they also get our presence as well. They encounter not just our sacrifice, but our authenticity too. And that kind of service does not erase us. It deepens the connection. It strengthens the intimacy and it honors both ourselves and others as well. And one of the ways that service quietly turns into disappearing is through like these unspoken bargains. And so this is where we tell ourselves, if I keep giving, they'll keep me. If I keep serving, then they'll value me. If I keep sacrificing, I'll finally be enough. And on the surface, this looks like generosity, but underneath, this is really fear disguised as love. And fear driven service is never sustainable. It pushes us beyond our limits and convinces us that boundaries are selfish. And it also whispers that our only worth is in what we do for others, right? And over time, this kind of service doesn't deepen relationships. It actually, it distorts them. It creates these dynamics where others come to really expect our disappearance, and where we believe love can only be earned through being useful, right? But intimacy does not work this way. Intimacy is not built on utility. It's built on honesty. And if I'm serving you only because I'm afraid of losing you, then I'm not really truly connecting with you. I'm managing you. I'm controlling how you see me by giving at the expense of myself. And that's not intimacy. That's we're moving into performance territory here. Young men especially, like, we got to name this. We've inherited these scripts that equate masculinity with provision alone. So we're told to be the provider, be the fixer, be the one who carries it all. And while service is noble, disappearing is destructive. Because if I give you everything but never show you my truth, like my needs, my limits, myself, then you don't actually know who I am. You only know the version of me that erases himself to keep you happy. And this erasure, it shows up in these subtle ways. We say yes when we want to say no. We volunteer for every need. We even when we're already feeling stretched, and we hide our exhaustion behind smiles, and we tell ourselves that this is maturity. This is love. This is strength. But in reality, it's avoidance. It's fear of being unwanted if we're not endlessly useful. So integrity calls a different kind of service. Integrity asks us to give from a place of wholeness, where our yes has weight because it really comes from freedom and not fear. Integrity allows us to say no without shame. It allows us to set boundaries without feeling guilty, and to recognize that our worth is not defined by our usefulness. And when we serve from that place, our service is healthier and deeper and longer lasting. I've discovered that when I give out of fear, the result is oftentimes resentment. I end up empty and bitter and distant. But when I give out of integrity, when I choose to service and give freely in a way that aligns with my values, the result is intimacy, because people don't just get my actions, they actually get me. And that's what creates a real connection. The line between service and disappearing is really thin, but it matters. See, service builds up, whereas disappearing erodes. Service says, I will bring myself to you in love, but disappearance says, I will erase myself so that you will love me. See, the one is rooted in courage, and the other one is rooted in fear, and only one of these leads to intimacy. Another way of disappearing hides behind or inside service, the way we try to ignore reciprocity. See, healthy service makes room for give and take. It acknowledges that the relationships are built on mutuality. And sometimes I carry you, and sometimes you carry me. But disappearance turns service into this one-way street. And so we keep giving, and when nothing comes back, we don't protest. We tell ourselves, this is love, this is maturity, this is what it means to be strong. But deep down, something is beginning to fracture, because relationships without reciprocity are not sustainable. They may survive for a while, but they will never really thrive. Without the courage to name our needs, we become invisible in the very relationships that we're working so hard to preserve. Young men, I think, are particularly vulnerable to this trap. Many of us are raised with the expectation that our value comes from self-sacrifice. That the more we disappear, the more admirable we are. And we admire the man who works himself to exhaustion for his family, for example, right? Or the friend who never says no, or the partner who absorbs everything quietly. But if service erases the self, then it's not noble, it's destructive. Disappearing often feels like the path of least resistance, though, doesn't it? It avoids conflict. It ensures the people keep seeing us as reliable. It keeps us safe from the fear of rejection, perhaps. But that safety comes at the cost of intimacy, because intimacy, again, requires me to bring my whole self, my voice, my needs, my limits. And if I disappear, intimacy disappears with me. See, I've seen this in my own life. Like, there were times that I gave so much that I no longer really recognized who I was. I thought it was what love required, but what I didn't realize was that my disappearing was not helping anyone. It wasn't giving them the gift of my presence. It wasn't, it was more like I was giving them a hollowed out version of who I was. And eventually that hollow shell collapsed under the weight of resentment and exhaustion. Integrity, though, demands something far different. It asks us to draw these boundaries, not as walls to keep others out, but more so as markers that allow us to serve from a place of strength. So, no, boundaries are not selfish. Boundaries are really the way that we ensure that our service remains authentic and that it comes from love rather than from fear. See, without boundaries, our giving becomes this slow form of self erasing. And again, the paradox is that when we serve with boundaries, our service becomes far more meaningful. A yes that's given from freedom has far more power than a yes given from fear. People can feel the difference here. They can tell when our presence is authentic rather than obligatory. And authentic service creates and deepens intimacy because it flows from honesty rather than from compulsion. And this is why, young men, we must relearn the meaning of service. Not as disappearance, not as self erasure, but as presence. See, true service means I am here. I am fully myself. I'm giving not to prove my worth, but more so to express it. And that kind of service honors both me and you. It creates connection rather than resentment. And it builds intimacy rather than eroding it. The line between service and disappearing is, like I said, so razor thin. But the consequences are worlds apart. Service that's rooted in integrity brings life. It deepens connection. It strengthens intimacy and allows others to know us as we truly are. Whereas disappearing, by contrast, it erodes all of that. It trains us, it distances us, it leaves us feeling invisible in the very relationships where we long to be seen. Now, the temptation is to disappear, and that's a strong temptation. Fear whispers that our worth is really tied to our usefulness, and that saying no will cost us love, and that boundaries will make us selfish. But the truth is, real love does not demand erasure. Real love wants presence, not performance. It wants the whole you, not just the pieces of you that are convenient or helpful. For young men, this is a lesson I think that we must carry forward. See, manhood is not measured by how much of yourself you can erase so that others can feel comfortable around you. It's measured by how faithfully you can show up in both strength and honesty. To serve without losing yourself is one of the hardest balances to strike, but it's also one of the most important ones because only then can service really flow from courage rather than from fear. At Uber Vintagers, this conviction is central to my mission, calling men into lives of integrity and intimacy. Integrity for me means I don't lie to myself about my limits. And intimacy means I don't hide my needs from the people who care about me the most. And together, those two ensure that my service is real, that it gives without erasing, and that it builds without destroying, and that it honors both me and those that I am serving as well. And this is where our conversation will point us forward. See, the difference between true service and disappearing is not just a personal choice, I would say. It's part of a larger pattern. It's one of the many, many ways that fear disguises itself as virtue. See, soon I'm going to be unpacking this far more carefully in what I call the 764 movement. It's a framework for naming these patterns and reclaiming a life that is whole and present and free. But for now, just know this: service that costs you yourself isn't service at all, it's disappearing. So ask yourself, when I give, am I present or am I vanishing? Am I servicing or am I disappearing? Because that answer will determine whether your relationships grow in intimacy or collapse under the weight of absence. So, my dear listener, let's choose presence. Let's choose integrity. Let's choose a kind of service that honors both others and ourselves, because that's the kind of service that I think is sustainable and lasts the long haul. Thanks for listening in. Drop me a comment down below. I'd love to hear how this landed for you. See you in the next episode.